They said I had a spending problem, that I couldn't be trusted with something as important as a mortgage. My mother's voice carried perfectly through the baby monitor I'd repurposed as a listening device, tucked behind the potted fern in the living room of my own condo. She was holding a glass of my Pinot Noir, standing in my kitchen, telling my aunt that the best thing the family ever did was convince me to put the title in my brother's name, for safekeeping. I sat in my car in the underground parking garage, 3 floors below them, watching the feed on my phone. They thought I was at a work conference in Calgary. They had no idea I was a certified forensic accountant who had spent the last 14 months building a case file thick enough to use as a doorstop. I tapped the screen twice. The smart lock on the front door cycled to a new 6-digit code I had generated that afternoon. They weren't guests anymore. They were trespassers. My name is Claire Arsenault. I am 31 years old. I own a 900 square foot condo on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Ottawa, and for the last 2 years, I have been paying the mortgage, the condo fees, the hydro bill, and the property tax on a unit I was not allowed to live in. My brother Marcus moved in the weekend I signed the papers. He told my parents he needed somewhere stable while he got back on his feet after the divorce. My parents told me it was temporary. Temporary became a lease agreement I never signed. Temporary became my mother redecorating the second bedroom. Temporary became Marcus listing the address on his driver's license, his voter registration, and his LinkedIn profile as though the $43,000 down payment I scraped together over 6 years of overtime had been his idea all along. I turned the heat down to 16 degrees. In November, in Ottawa, 16 degrees inside feels like standing in a walk-in cooler. I watched on the camera feed as my mother pulled her cardigan tighter and looked up at the thermostat with an expression I recognized. It was the same expression she made every time something stopped working the way she expected it to. Confused first, then annoyed, then looking around for someone to blame. She found Marcus in the kitchen. He was already on his phone. I already knew what he was doing. The building's Wi-Fi had just been rerouted to a secondary network I'd set up the week before. Their devices would show full bars but zero connectivity. No streaming. No calls over data. The landline I had quietly canceled 3 days ago. The only number that would connect was 911, and my own. I had not always been this precise. There was a version of me, not so long ago, who would have sent a long emotional text at midnight and cried when no one responded. There was a version of me who believed that if I just explained things clearly enough, if I laid out the facts calmly and without accusation, my family would recognize what they had done and make it right. I spent years being that version of myself. I documented nothing. I raised my voice at the wrong moments and went silent at the wrong moments and let my mother reframe every confrontation as evidence that I was the difficult one, the sensitive one, the one who always made everything harder than it needed to be. The water started boiling the morning I got the letter from the mortgage lender. I was at my desk at work, eating a sad desk lunch of leftover lentil soup, when the email notification appeared. It was a routine annual statement. Property value assessment, outstanding balance, insurance renewal reminder, standard. Except the insurance renewal was addressed to Marcus Arsenault, listed as primary policyholder, and the coverage amount had been quietly increased by $60,000 6 months earlier. I had never authorized that change. I had never been contacted. My brother had called the insurance company, represented himself as the owner, and restructured the policy. On paper, if that condo burned down, Marcus would collect. I set down my soup. I did not cry. I opened a new spreadsheet and I started from the beginning. What I found over the next 14 months was not a mistake. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a slow, patient, methodical transfer of everything I had built, executed by people who had watched me work for it and decided they deserved it more. The down payment had come from my own savings, built up over 6 years of working full-time while completing my CPA designation at night. My parents had contributed nothing financially, but they had contributed enormously in pressure. When I found the unit, my father sat across from me at their kitchen table and told me that a single woman buying property alone was making a statement to the world that she didn't value family. That if I really wanted to be smart about it, I would put the title in joint names with Marcus, who had a stronger credit history at the time due to the joint account he'd shared with his ex-wife. It would help me qualify for a better rate, my father said. It was just paperwork. It didn't mean anything. I could change it later. I was 26. I wanted my father to be proud of me. I signed what they put in front of me. 3 weeks after closing, Marcus's divorce was finalized. He called me from a hotel room and asked if he could stay at the condo for a month while he sorted out his living situation. 1 month. I said yes. I had not set foot inside my own condo since. Every time I tried to arrange a visit, something came up. Marcus was working from home. My mother was staying over. They were having a small thing, just close family, and it wasn't really a great time. I started staying at my friend's place. Then I started renting a room in a shared house near Gatineau. I kept paying the mortgage. I kept paying the condo fees. I told myself this arrangement was temporary. I told myself that until the insurance document proved it wasn't. When I pulled the full financial picture together, the numbers were very clear. Over 26 months, I had made every mortgage payment. I had paid every hydro bill, every quarterly condo fee, and the full annual property tax installment. I had also, without realizing it, been making minimum payments on a line of credit I did not remember opening. It was registered at a Scotiabank branch in Marcus's neighborhood. The application had been submitted online. The electronic signature was mine because Marcus had access to the email account I used at 23 and had never changed the password. $31,000. Not a dramatic number by some standards. Not the kind of number that makes news. But $31,000 borrowed in my name. Spent on what the statements showed was furniture, a ski trip to Tremblant, deposits on a truck he returned 4 months later, and a custom home gym setup currently sitting in my second bedroom. I closed the laptop. I went for a very long walk along the canal. I watched the sky go orange over the Parliament buildings, and I made a decision. I was not going to send a text. I was not going to call a family meeting. I was not going to explain myself or ask for anything back or give anyone the opportunity to reframe this as me being the difficult one. I was going to do what I did at work. I was going to build the case, wait for the right moment, and let the evidence do the talking. The right moment turned out to be my mother's birthday weekend. She had been planning it for months. A gathering at the condo, which she now referred to as Marcus's place without any apparent awareness of how that sounded. She had invited my aunt and uncle from Kingston, 2 of her friends from her book club, and my father's younger sister who was visiting from Moncton. She had called me 3 times to ask whether I was coming. I had said yes every time. What I had not mentioned was that I would be arriving 48 hours early, alone, with a locksmith and a binder. I had the locks changed on a Thursday afternoon. The locksmith was professional and quick. He didn't ask questions. I showed him my identification and the title document, and he nodded and got to work. When he left, I walked through every room of my condo for the first time in over 2 years. It was strange. The furniture was not mine. The artwork on the walls was not mine. The kitchen had been reorganized and there was a coffee maker on the counter that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. In the second bedroom, exactly as the credit card statements had suggested, there was a full home gym, a cable machine, a rack of dumbbells, a folded-up treadmill pushed against the wall below the window where I had always imagined putting a reading chair. I stood there for a long time. Then I set up 3 cameras, one in the entryway mounted inside the smoke detector housing, one in the living room disguised inside a decorative plant I had brought with me, one covering the front door from the hallway, all of them feeding live to my phone, all of them recording with time-stamped cloud backup that would sync whether or not the local Wi-Fi was active. I left before Marcus came home. I drove to a hotel 2 kilometers away, ordered room service, and waited. They arrived Friday evening. I watched the feed from my hotel bed. Marcus came first, then my parents an hour later, then my aunt and uncle, then the book club friends. I watched my mother give a brief tour of the living room as though she had decorated it herself, which, to be fair, she mostly had. I watched Marcus open a bottle of wine from the rack above the refrigerator, a rack I had installed and stocked, and pour glasses for everyone, without offering to check whether the wine was mine or his, because the distinction had long since stopped mattering to him. I watched them laugh. I ordered a second coffee from room service and pulled out the binder. I had spent 14 months on that binder. It contained a certified copy of the title showing my name as sole owner of record, because despite everything, Marcus had never actually completed the steps to formally transfer the title into joint names. The paperwork my father had described as just paperwork had in fact never been filed. The condo was mine, legally and completely, and had been since closing. It also contained printed bank statements showing every mortgage payment made from my account. It contained the line of credit agreement with the electronic signature forensics I had ordered through a private document examiner, which confirmed the application had been submitted from a device registered to Marcus. It contained 14 months of hydro bills, condo fee receipts, and property tax payments, all from my account. It contained a signed letter from my building's insurance provider confirming that my brother had misrepresented himself as the owner when requesting the policy amendment, which they had flagged internally as a compliance issue and had already begun reviewing. Tab 7 was the one I was most proud of. It was the rental assistance application. 6 months after Marcus moved in, at some point when I was still operating under the delusion that this arrangement was temporary and voluntary, my brother had applied for a provincial rent supplement through the Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit. He had listed himself as a low-income renter paying monthly rent to a private landlord. He had named my mother as the landlord. She had co-signed the application. For 11 months, my brother had collected housing benefit payments totaling just over $9,000. My mother had received $800 a month as a declared landlord. Neither of them had reported this income on their tax returns, which I knew because I had, for the previous 3 years, prepared both of their returns as a favor. You cannot simultaneously be the owner of a property and a subsidized renter paying rent to a third party on that same property. The geometry of the fraud collapses the moment you lay the documents side by side, which is exactly what tab 7 did. I closed the binder. I turned off the light. I set an alarm for 6 in the morning. Saturday was my mother's birthday. I arrived at the building at 7:15, before anyone was awake. I let myself in with my new key, walked quietly to the kitchen, and started a pot of coffee. I sat down at the kitchen table with the binder in front of me and waited. My mother came out of the bedroom first, in her robe, expecting a quiet Saturday morning. She stopped in the doorway when she saw me. For a moment she didn't say anything. Then her face rearranged itself into the expression I had seen 100 times. Warm on the surface, calculating underneath. "Good morning, sweetheart. When did you get here?" I said, "A little while ago." She looked at the binder. She looked at me. She said, "You seem tired," and moved toward the coffee maker. Marcus appeared 15 minutes later. He registered my presence with a look that lasted half a second and then went flat, the way a screen goes dark when the power cuts. He poured himself a coffee and asked if I'd eaten. We sat at the table, the three of us, in a silence so brittle I could hear the building's ventilation system. My father came out eventually, then my aunt. Then the book club friends started texting to confirm a 2 o'clock arrival. I said, "I need everyone to sit down for a moment." My mother said, "Claire, this is not the time, it's my birthday." I said, "I know, I'm sorry, it won't take long." I opened the binder to the first tab, the title certificate. I laid it flat on the table and turned it so everyone could read it. "My name is on this document," I said. "Just my name. I am the sole registered owner of this property. I have been paying the mortgage, the condo fees, the hydro, and the property taxes since the day of closing. I would like Marcus to make arrangements to leave by the end of the month." Marcus laughed, the way someone laughs when they're deciding in real time whether to be amused or aggressive. He said, "You can't just walk in here and—" I said, "I changed the locks yesterday. I have the only key." My father stood up. His chair scraped back loud and hard against the floor. He pointed at me and used the voice he had been using since I was 7 years old to make me feel small. The voice that meant I was about to be told I was being selfish, irrational, making a scene over nothing. He said I was being ridiculous, that Marcus was family, that this was not how we handled things, that if I had a problem I should have come to him and discussed it privately instead of ambushing everyone on a Saturday morning. I waited until he finished. Then I turned to tab 3. I said, "This is a line of credit opened in my name 28 months ago. The electronic signature on the application does not match my device history, my IP address, or my login location at the time of submission. I have a forensic document report confirming that. The balance is $31,000. I have been making the minimum payments, which I initially assumed was an account I had forgotten about. I would like Marcus to explain how his contact information came to be listed as the secondary account holder." Marcus put down his coffee cup very carefully. My mother said, "There must be a mistake." "There is no mistake," I said. I turned to tab 5. I said, "This is the insurance amendment that increased the policy coverage by $60,000 and listed Marcus as primary policyholder. I did not authorize this. The insurance provider has already flagged it." My father sat back down. I turned to tab 7. I said, "This is the Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit application Marcus submitted 6 months after moving in. In it, he identifies himself as a low-income renter. Mom is listed as the landlord and received payments for 11 months. Neither of those things is possible if I am the registered owner, and neither of you is on the title." I looked at my mother. I said, "You can't be the landlord of a property you don't own, and Marcus can't receive rent subsidies as a tenant in a property where the supposed landlord is his own mother, and the actual owner has never agreed to any tenancy." My aunt got up quietly and took her coffee to the balcony. The book club friends, who had arrived slightly early and were now standing very still near the entryway, began making noises about coming back later. My father said, "This is a family matter." I said, "When it involves a fraudulent benefit application and an unauthorized line of credit, it stops being a family matter." Marcus stood up. He was using the voice now too, the one that sounds like he's being patient with someone who is being deliberately obtuse, the one designed to make you feel stupid for taking something seriously. He said that I was overreacting. He said that he had always intended to pay me back. He said that the line of credit was a temporary measure during a hard period, and that I was making him feel like a criminal over something that was, at its core, a misunderstanding between family members. I said, "Sit down." He didn't expect that. None of them did. I said, "I have been paying for this condo for 2 years and 4 months while living in a rented room in Gatineau. I did not get to use my own kitchen. I did not get to hang a picture on my own wall. I did not get to sit in front of my own window and drink coffee in the morning. I paid for this home, and you lived in it, and you borrowed money in my name without asking, and you collected government housing benefits as a renter in a property where you were not a renter, and now you want me to feel bad for taking it back. My mother started crying. Controlled, strategic tears, the kind deployed to shift the temperature of a room. She said she couldn't believe I was doing this. She said she thought we raised you better than this, and then caught herself because the pronoun didn't quite land the way she intended. That's when I called the non-emergency line. I had decided weeks earlier that I was not going to involve the police unless I needed to. What I needed was for Marcus to leave and for the line of credit to be addressed, and for the insurance file to be corrected. What changed that calculation was the housing benefit application, because that one wasn't between family members. That one was fraud against a provincial program. It involved my mother's signature. It involved government money. It was not something I could quietly resolve at a kitchen table. The officer who arrived was thorough and unhurried. She came alone first, looked around the room, asked everyone to take a seat. My mother immediately went into the version of herself that she performed for authority figures. Gracious, slightly bewildered, a woman who could not possibly be connected to anything complicated. She said there had been a miscommunication. She said I had always been a little high-strung. She said, "I'm sure we can sort this out without making it a bigger deal than it needs to be." The officer said, "Can I see the title document, please?" I handed it over. She looked at it. She looked at Marcus. She said, "Are you listed on this title?" Marcus said, "Not technically, but..." She said, "Is there a lease agreement?" Marcus said, "It was more of an informal arrangement." I said, "There was no arrangement. I never agreed to any tenancy. I have not lived here since the week he moved in." The officer looked at the stack of tabs. She said, "Can I take a look at those?" I said, "Yes, that's what they're for." She read quietly for several minutes. My father tried twice to interject, and she held up one hand without looking at him, and he stopped both times. When she got to tab 7, she paused. She looked up at my mother. She said, "Is this your signature on this co-applicant declaration?" My mother looked at the page for a long moment. She said, "I would need to see the full context." The officer said, "The full context is that it's a housing benefit application where you declare yourself the landlord of this unit. Are you the landlord?" My mother said, "It was complicated." The officer radioed for a second unit. What happened after that took several hours and was, in its own way, anticlimactic in the best possible sense. Anticlimactic the way a very long-delayed exhale feels anticlimactic. Unremarkable. Inevitable. Correct. Marcus was asked to vacate the premises while the file was reviewed. He left with a backpack and the expression of a man who had genuinely believed, until about 40 minutes ago, that things would not go this way. My mother was asked to provide a formal statement regarding the housing benefit application, which meant she would be contacted again. My father left without saying goodbye to me, which I had expected, and which no longer had the power it once did. My aunt squeezed my shoulder on her way out. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The book club friends had left during the second phone call. I walked through the condo after everyone was gone. I stood in the living room for a while. Then I took the home gym apart piece by piece and stacked it in the hallway for Marcus to collect. I rehung the smoke detector. I watered the plant with the camera in it. I made a second pot of coffee, and I drank it standing at the window, looking out over the city, watching the November light fall flat and gray across the rooftops. 6 weeks later, Marcus repaid the line of credit in full as part of a civil settlement agreement. The insurance policy was corrected and reissued in my name alone. The Provincial Housing Benefit Office opened a formal review of the application. My mother received a repayment demand for the landlord payments she had collected. They retained a lawyer. Their lawyer called my lawyer twice, and both times my lawyer said the same thing. My client has the documents and is prepared to proceed. They settled. I didn't celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate exactly. You don't celebrate getting back something that should never have been taken. You just stand in your own kitchen on a Tuesday morning, making coffee in a machine you chose yourself, looking at walls you're allowed to put things on, and you let the quiet settle around you. The condo is exactly what I always imagined it could be. Small, mine. I changed the password on my old email account. Then I started paying down the mortgage with the settlement funds, and I watched the balance drop, and I did not tell my parents the new Wi-Fi password. And for the first time in 2 years, I slept 8 consecutive hours in my own bed. It turns out quiet is something you can build.